In 1962, as To Kill a Mockingbird cemented his status as an icon, Gregory Peck became Hollywood's living monument to virtue. With his steady gaze and dignified presence, he was seen as the moral anchor in an industry of excess. Yet beneath that calm exterior brewed a profound frustration, a simmering disdain for the disorder and pretense that swirled around him. His career became a series of battles, not just for good roles, but for basic professionalism, pitting his disciplined soul against the era's most chaotic talents. The set was his sanctuary, and these men turned it into a circus. It began with the original rebel, the man who treated acting as a form of anarchy, Marlon Brando. The film The Missouri Breaks was nearly derailed before it started. Peck had been assured Brando had matured, that the wildness was tempered. The reality in Montana was a stark betrayal. Brando arrived not just with a script, but with a suitcase of liquor, 3 pet snakes, and a toy piano he claimed was essential for channeling emotion. Each morning, while Peck meticulously prepared, Brando would sit alone, tinkering on the keys, muttering about acting in the colour blue. To Peck, for whom discipline was sacred, this was not artistry. It was indulgent nonsense. The chasm between them was absolute. One man building a performance brick by brick, the other waiting for a feeling to float by. The confrontation peaked when Brando walked onto the set, cradling a live pigeon, announcing it would be his scene partner to symbolise man and free spirit. As the cameras rolled, Brando ignored his lines, focusing instead on the bird, leaving Peck stranded in the scene, his carefully prepared dialogue worthless. The final insult came when Brando began whispering, rendering his performance inaudible. Peck, his patience exhausted, told the director he needed to see a psychiatrist. The director's plea to Brando: "This is a movie, not an exorcism," fell on deaf ears. Brando simply smoked and suggested Peck try to feel it. They occupied the same physical space, but lived in different universes. So, years later, Brando would dismiss Peck as a soulless statue, a final, cold epitaph for a collaboration that never was. If Brando represented chaotic artistry, Frank Sinatra embodied arrogant indifference. During Captain Newman, MD, their worlds collided with the force of 2 opposing planets. Hence, Peck, the man who arrived at dawn prepared and precise, faced Sinatra, who sauntered in post-lunch, often trailing the scent of last night's whiskey, holding an entire crew hostage to his whims. Sinatra was untouchable, a global icon for whom acting was a lucrative hobby. His lack of professionalism was a direct affront to Peck's entire ethos. The tension simmered until Sinatra, during a pivotal scene, shattered the atmosphere by whistling and spitting on the floor. The provocation was blatant. When a young crew member compared Peck to a priest, Sinatra seized it, christening him St. Gregory, a title he wielded as a sneer. The breaking point was Sinatra's grand entrance, 3 hours late and smelling strongly of whiskey. When pressed, he snapped that he didn't need direction from a movie set when he commanded crowds at Caesar's Palace. Peck's response was quiet, cold and lethal. He set down his script and said, "This isn't a nightclub, Frank. We're making a movie." Sinatra's retort: "Then go make it yourself," hung in the air, a declaration of war between 2 irreconcilable codes, one of craft, the other of celebrity. Peck finished the film, but refused to share a frame with Sinatra in spirit, never looking at him directly in their scenes. Asked later if he'd work with him again, Peck offered a legendary dismissal. He'd rather act with an empty chair, as it wouldn't spit in people's faces. The next adversary attacked not Peck's patience, but his very essence. Richard Burton, a whirlwind of talent and self-destruction, despised what Peck represented. At a Beverly Hills party, upon meeting the man who embodied Atticus Finch, Burton erupted into drunken theatrical ridicule, proclaiming Peck wasn't an actor, but a human rights speech wrapped in an expensive suit. The room laughed, but Burton's campaign was relentless. He dubbed him St. Gregory, mocking his perceived virtue at every turn. Burton saw in Peck's calm dignity a mirror that reflected his own chaotic failings, and he hated the reflection. He confessed he viewed Peck as his conscience, the unbearable proof that a man could live without madness or sin. Their mutual animosity reached its climax when a proposed film pairing them was killed instantly. Peck refused outright to work with an arrogant fool. Burton's pride was wounded, but hatred was rooted in a painful, personal envy. When Burton died, Peck's comment was famously brief and pointedly unemotional. Then came the clash of ideologies, a battle for the soul of America itself. John Wayne and Gregory Peck were opposing poles of the national identity. Wayne, the symbol of rugged, unwavering patriotism, saw Peck's vocal opposition to the Vietnam War and advocacy for civil rights as weak, moralizing treachery. Peck viewed Wayne as the avatar of mindless aggression. Their Cold War turned hot at a Hollywood party where Wayne, before a crowd, toasted that an America full of Pecks would lose any war before it began. From across the room, Peck stood and calmly replied that an America full of Waynes would never know peace. It was a public fracture that never healed. They refused to be in the same room, let alone share a screen. A planned sequel to True Grit was incinerated by their mutual veto. Even as Wayne faced his final illness, Peck offered only distant, formal condolences. Their conflict transcended personal dislike. It was a civil war in miniature, fought on the red carpets and in the columns of Hollywood. Yet, the man who perhaps came closest to breaking Peck's famed composure was neither a bully nor an ideologue, but a maddening, magnificent genius. Orson Welles. On the set of Moby Dick, Welles treated discipline as a petty concern. He arrived late, shrouded in cigar smoke and casually draped an arm around a rigid Peck, telling everyone to lighten up. During a solemn moment, Welles interrupted to philosophize loudly about God and madness. In the middle of filming, he turned to Peck and declared, "You'll never understand, Gregory. You don't understand anything." Peck stood, jaw clenched, thinking a thought so violent it shocked him. Sing. Welles moved through the set like a force of nature, dismissing Peck as a pitiful little man who lacked the necessary spice of madness. For Peck, this was the ultimate lesson. That towering genius could walk hand in hand with profound disrespect. The final, most enduring rivalry was the quietest, and perhaps the most tragic, Kirk-Douglas. For decades, they waged a silent war. Douglas, all raw ambition and volcanic energy, resented Peck's effortless image as the virtuous, A-list saint. Echo? He mocked him as stiff, a man who let his morality do the acting. When Peck won the Oscar for Atticus Finch, Douglas muttered bitterly from the audience that if Peck were truly that moral, Hollywood wouldn't be so corrupt. Peck's quiet dismissal of Douglas as a showman only fueled the fire. Douglas chased gritty, defiant roles to prove his depth, while Peck remained the steady centre. Their rivalry hardened Douglas, turning him into a perpetually hungry old wolf, forever trying to outshine the statue-like ideal Peck represented. Time, however, wrote a softer ending. In old age, after a stroke, Douglas admitted through tears that Peck was the man he had resented, envied, and ultimately wished he could be. Hearing of this simply said the hatred was gone, replaced by a wish for mutual understanding. These collisions were not merely personal spats, they were fundamental conflicts of character. Peck's journey reveals that Hollywood's golden age was not just a dream factory, but a grinding machine where opposing forces of order and chaos, restraint and indulgence, morality and ambition were constantly at war. The spotlight promised glory, but it also exposed every flaw, every insecurity, every line of principle. For Gregory Peck, the saintly image was not an act, but a fortress he maintained against the relentless siege of egos. The light that made him a legend was the same light that cast the long, dark shadows of his fiercest battles. In the end, his legacy is not just the noble heroes he portrayed, but the very real, very human strength it took to defend his own integrity in a world designed to sell it off, piece by piece, for a good show.